Committee of the Whole is back from recess. It's 9:03 a.m. in the morning, and I'd like to thank Jesse Lujan, who's sitting here with me. Unfortunately, that's all you have right now. So we will come back as soon as we get quorum. So we are in recess until we get quorum.
We now move to the next amendment, authored by Senator Barnett. This amendment, just so that everybody's aware, it was submitted earlier, and then he had to make changes, and it just updated, so it did meet the clock. The additional funding for GDOE's operation budget. Okay? I beg your pardon, Senator Roy? I'll let him explain that, whatever he made changes. Senator Barnett, if you can, please proceed with your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning to my colleagues and to the people of Guam. This is a relatively simple amendment that I hope gets through easily. It's additional funding for the Guam Department of Education operations budget. The sum of up to $10 million is appropriated to the GDOE from general fund revenues of fiscal year 23 for the purpose of supplementing GDOE's operations for fiscal year 24, except that up to $500,000 shall be allocated to the Chamorro language program. And I'll just go ahead and start there. And so, in conversation with Senor Jimmy Terry, who heads the Chamorro language program, he was requesting an additional $500,000 to strengthen curriculums for programs to include the FISCAL immersion at PC Guåhan, as well as professional development, supplementary materials and modules for grades K through 12 on the Chamorro language and culture program, and K through 6 for the FISCAL, or the Chamorro medium immersion program. The $10 million is no secret. We had the Guam Department of Education superintendent and Mr. Franklin Cooper Nurse, the money man down here, and they basically said they would need $30 million. And so this $10 million would go to utilities payments as well as contracts. And they would have no issue at all with spending this money because they need it, as they testified before the body. Their budget's extremely short, and after they pay personnel, they will only have $10 million left for operations, and their utilities last fiscal year were $22 million. So I think it all adds up. And I just wanted to speak specifically to some of my colleagues who have had issues. I know that yesterday there were some issues and concerns raised with the language of the funding. And so this funding source is from general fund revenues of fiscal year 2023. And I just wanted to point out, because yesterday I had proffered an amendment which used appropriated actual general fund revenues, and there was some concern about the language that I used. And I just wanted to point out here for the record, Mr. Chair, that my colleagues have supported shakier funding language in the recent past. For example, there was a program that we had passed into law to assist local businesses, and the funding language here was the appropriated sum of up to $15 million set forth in this section shall be immediately transferred to DOA as soon as such funds become available for the purpose of funding the program. And I just want to draw the comparison, with all due respect to my colleagues, Mr. Chair, that when it was time to support the businesses to the tune of millions and millions of dollars, this language, which is a whole lot shakier than the language in my amendment of today and the ones that I've proffered previously in this budget session. And so I just ask that we hold that consistency, because my colleagues did talk about consistency, and I think that we need to be consistent and set a standard. And, you know, if it's to assist the businesses, I think that some of my colleagues have been very willing to entertain and approve funding that, again, has questionable language, and we know we're getting the money. And I just ask that they hold that same energy when it comes to assisting our public schools, Mr. Chair, which they have definitely pled their case to me in a very compelling way. And I'm just saying, if we're going to embrace such shaky language to assist our businesses, then we can surely embrace this language to assist our public schools. That's all I'm saying, Mr. Chair, just with all due respect, because I did hear that argument yesterday that there was very critical of the funding language that I had, and I just wanted to point out that when it came to supporting the businesses, we were okay with as soon as such funds become available, which to me is, I mean, you want to talk about real, actual, tangible, that doesn't sound very tangible to me, but, you know, we're okay with it. I'm just asking that we hold that same standard, and I think that we're a little more specific with this amendment. I think the GDOE has definitely made the case that they need $10 million, and maybe even more. And so I just would ask for the support of my colleagues. I get it that they have shown in this session that they're making it what they believe is a principled stand by just objecting outright to any type of funding that isn't taking from Peter to pay Paul. And I just think, you know, if in the past we've embraced funding language that's a little, this is much stronger language, Mr. Chair. And so again, I would just ask for the support of my colleagues. I hope I'm not ruining it, but I was thinking about this last night because, you know, I was harangued and lambasted on the floor yesterday because of the word I had put in there, which was actual, and a lot of talk was brought up about you being tangible, and I just wanted to show for the record that if we're talking about being consistent, we have actually been inconsistent in the type of language that we're willing to accept. And I think that if we're willing to close our eyes to assist the businesses and go with as soon as such funds become available, maybe, then we need to stand up for the public schools and really, once and for all, give them this money, because we know this conversation has been the finger pointing back at the legislature that we're not giving them the tools that they need. And so I just want to be able to give them the tools that they need. They definitely need $10 million. And if we come back next year and, you know, they didn't use it the way that we wanted to, then we can act accordingly. But I think, again, that they have definitely made the case that they need this money to sustain themselves through to the next fiscal year, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Barnett. With that same, right before you speak, Senator Dueñas, I'd like OFB to speak because he was explaining to me, there's maybe some questions on the amendment, but I'd like the OFB to comment on it.
Could we just confirm which amendment we're on, if you don't mind reading it, Mr. Chair?
We're on the one that reads, to add a new section to Chapter 2 of Part 1 of the bill to read additional funding for GDOE's operation budget. The sum of $10 million is appropriated to the Guam Department of Education from general funds revenue of fiscal year 23 for the purpose of supplementing GDOE's operation for fiscal year 2024, except that up to $500,000 shall be allocated to the Chamorro language program. We're good? Okay. Now I ask the OLB to make comment because I just want to make sure we're it's not a question of shady or whatever the language used, but it's about where the money's at and what can we do. Okay? Steve, if you can, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, Senators. Yeah, I'm going to take the bill and I'm interpreting it verbatim. And it just says that the intent of the bill is to appropriate $10 million from the general fund revenues for FY23 and another $500,000, I believe, for, again, GDOE for FY24. But that $500,000 fund source is from FY23 revenues. In current year right now, what we projected in the Budget Act, we have actually already appropriated the entire revenues that we projected. Saying that is that anything in excess of what we've appropriated is what we considered excess, and we project that excess up to the end of the fiscal year, which is reflected in the CR year report. Currently, as of June, that excess amount amounts up to 11 million. We have collected thus far about 75 million in excess revenues in FY23, but we have already appropriated 68 million of that 75 million. So technically, the only balance in the excess amount that we're anticipating to the end of the year, and remember this is as of June, is only 6 million. Okay, so that's the difference between the 75, what we have collected in excess, less the 68, what we have already appropriated in excess of the 23 adopted revenues, leaves a balance of 7 million. Again, that 7 million is an anticipated amount that we hope to generate by the end of the fiscal year. Okay, so going back again to the bill, it's the way I'm reading it is that you're appropriating it out of the FY23 revenues. And that, again, that revenues, when we talk about FY23 revenues, we normally talk about what is in the FY23 budget. What has been adopted and what has been amended thus far to date. So to the bill, there's technically no funds for this 10 million appropriation unless we want to wait until the end of the fiscal year to actually see how much we realize in excess funds over what we have already appropriated from the revenue base of what we've collected thus far. And that's how I'm reading it, okay? Because the bill just says from FY23 revenues. Okay? Oh, and yeah, as far as the difference between FY23 and FY24 appropriations from Guam GDOE, you know, we bumped them up by 12 million. Of that 12 million, 7 million is for the GPP, which we need to fund, and the balance of 5 million basically is for operation. That operation, I believe, is probably technically for power, because in the last EAFSC report, what they budgeted for power for the whole year is only 9.6. But we know, based on historical trends and expenditures, they're averaging about 14 million in power costs a year. So I like to think that portion of this operational, I mean this 12 million that we gave them, they will allocate for power to make sure that they don't run short. Thanks. Thank you.
Mr.
Thank you.
Oh,
sir.
Sorry.
You wanted to comment to his comment?
Yeah,
Yes,
could
sir.
you just clarify, because I swear you said yesterday we're tracking 11 mil, and the day before it's 15, and now you're saying 7 million? So yeah, should be right. I agree with the appropriations chair that it should be 17 million, not 7.
Okay, Senator, let me just clarify something here, okay? When we talk about revenues, there's two revenues that we're talking. We're talking about the gross revenues of what we collect in total and what we're tracking and what we've appropriated thus far. So yesterday when I mentioned about 11 million, you're right, because we're taking from the gross. Okay, so there is basically, you can technically say 11 million, versus if you took the bottom line and the way we're doing it has with what we've appropriated thus far, the balance is only 7. So technically you can say there's 11, you know, based on the gross, but if you look at the way the CER does, it only says like 7. Okay? Yeah.
Okay. I'll ask Senator Dueñas, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. I'm going live. This is how I go live. Mr. Chairman, at the risk of being the chief haranguer this morning, I have to ask Steve a question. Steve Guerrero, is budgeting a complex process?
It's a very complex process, Senator, and it takes years to actually kind of acquire the skill to actually come up with really finite numbers, and it involves a lot of data, information, communication, networking with all the people and all the entities out there that, we try to figure out what is the best budget for whatever it is that we're trying to do. In this case, it's for the government of Guam, and we normally take all kinds of information from various individuals, economists, Chamber of Commerce, University of Guam professors, the auditors, all those kind of things. And yes, it is.
Steve, when we appropriated the shaky funding source of $15 million for LEAP, did we adjust the revenues?
For the 15 million, Senator, no, we did not.
Did we appropriate $5 million, or did we match the governor's request at $5 million of ARP monies? In other words, did we do a 15-5 split?
What we did, Senator, is we appropriated $15 million for the general fund to match whatever amount the governor would like to match on that 15, and my understanding, it was 5.
So if we appropriated that 15 million, that means the funds had to be available, correct?
When you say appropriate, you're saying if you go back to the Budget Act and adjust it accordingly the way we've done others in the past, then yes, that money would become available and available for spending, yes.
Steve, of all the projects in the appropriated unaudited balance of fiscal year 22, in your opinion, is any of that money available currently?
Senator, I believe the official Guam audit for FY22 is going to be released real soon, hopefully in the next few days, if not by the end of the month. I would like to kind of refrain from making any statement whether or not there's any actual monies above what we appropriated in the law that would be available. So, yes.
I know you're being very careful, Mr. Guerrero, but let's just cut to the chase. Not one penny of that unappropriated revenue is available at this point in time, correct? Because it was predicated on the audited revenues of fiscal year 2022.
I think it would be safe to say, Senator, that, I'd like to think that your assertion is correct, but it would be difficult to say that now since we've already appropriated some of those funds already prior to the audit actually being put out and being official. So there have been some of that excess money that we realized in FY2022 that we did appropriate prior to the completion of the audit.
So could GMH right now go out and do procurement for labor and delivery?
Can you repeat the question?
Could GMH right now go out and do a solicitation, a bid for labor and delivery based on the $10 million that we appropriated of unaudited funds from fiscal year 2022?
I think the authority, Senator, for them to do that is there because the appropriation was passed by this body. So that appropriation actually exists. The big question is whether or not there's actual cash to back up that appropriation.
And therein lies the issue. See, empty promises are the worst thing that any legislature can ever do. And the problem here is even when we talk about this potential, first of all, now we're appropriating again within fiscal year 23 for fiscal year 24. And even if in this case we would still have to realize that revenue after the end of the fiscal year. But going back to the reason why the haranguing was going on yesterday was because of the fact that, particularly when we're talking about Department of Education, those funds will not be available until possibly June of next year if the audit makes it in time. The entire school year is done by the time those revenues would even potentially be available. And the difference between the 20 million and the attempt to realize revenues, unaudited revenues of fiscal year 23 is the 20 million is already appropriated. It's spoken for. To carry it forward is to carry forward a legitimate appropriation that adjusted revenues for fiscal year 23 that should have cash attached to it. That's the problem I have. You know, we want to do this. We want to make these appropriations. We want to make these promises. But the fact is that these promises are not tangible within the time frame of the appropriation, particularly in agencies that need to use this money throughout the fiscal year. I mean, by the time we would realize this revenue, other proposals besides this one attempting to now appropriate current year would be basically in time for the next budget. Because it would be June going into July and basically and essentially for the next school year. So that's the reason, you know, I don't want to demonize anyone. I don't want to, you know, take air out of balloons, but I'm going to tell you right now, I guarantee you GMH is not going to go out right now and solicit for OB. I guarantee you right now they're not going to bring in specialists on the $5 million that we set aside of unaudited revenues from 2022. Because they're not going to know if that funding source is real. It's appropriated, but if the funding source does not come out as complying with all of the appropriations from that unaudited revenue, kaboom, empty promise. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Dueñas. Does anyone else? I don't see any other hands. Senator... Madam Speaker, yes?
I'm a little confused, Mr. Chair. So we're talking about an amendment that would give the Guam Department of Education $10 million from general fund revenues from fiscal year 23. And this is $10 million from FY23, which when BBMR and DOE were in here, they kept pointing to the CRER that shows $11 million in excess revenues for FY23. In fact, they even predicted that we would have more than 11. We would have plus 5 is what they predict for the last month, August and September. So that would be 16. But today, OFB is telling us we only have 7 out of the 16 because of appropriations. So if you could just clarify what appropriations deducted from the 16 that we were predicting, or that not even predicting, that we've already received 11 of. From the 11 that we've actually received, how did we get down to 7?
Okay, Senator, the 75 million, what I mentioned is...
Well, if you could just use the 11 million. The 11 million, this was in June 2023.
No, but I'm trying to explain how I got down to the 6 million, 7 million. The 75 million that I'm referring to is what we've collected to date, 75 million.
Does that match the CRER amounts, or are we using a totally different number?
No, it matches.
Okay.
But you just have to do the math to come up with the 75. So what I'm saying is that what we collected thus far to date is 75 million. It doesn't include the extra 16 million going forward to the end of the year. So the 75 million is what we've collected in actual cash as of June 30th. It doesn't include the 16 million projected to the end of the fiscal year. So if you want to add the 16 million,
I don't want to.
Yeah.
I just want to talk about the 11 million.
okay,
So they're telling us based on collections
yes,
that we've collected 11 million over what we have appropriated.
yes.
Did we appropriate anything after that from this money?
Not that I'm aware of, not from the balance of that 11 million.
Okay.
Okay, so what I'm saying is that if you look at the CRR report, it has the revenues, amended revenues, and then tracking. The difference between those two is the 36 million, but you need to subtract the 25 million that was already appropriated for both the LEAP and
But
the,
they did that
GPA.
already to get the 11.
Yes, so that's how we came down with the 11. Because if you look on top of the, on the CER on page 3, on top, right at the bottom line of the column, it says 36. But they also took into account the 25. That's how we came up with the 11. So based on the CER report as of June, there is 11 million
Okay.
balance.
So there is enough in excess revenues already collected, not imaginary money, not empty promises, but in money actually collected, there is enough from FY23 to cover the 10 million in this appropriation. Isn't this the same funding that we used to fund the LEAP, was excess revenues? Isn't it the same funding that we used to fund the power credit, excess revenues from FY23? Isn't it the same funding, in fact, that we used to fund the 20 million to GDOE when we did Public Law 37.5? It's the same. We recognize that there were additional revenues that had actually been collected, and we used that money. And that's what this amendment's proposing to do, right?
And you're absolutely right, Senator. You're
All right.
absolutely right.
Thank
but,
you.
But I'm just saying, I'm qualifying my numbers. And I'm just saying, to date, we have actually collected $75 million, actual cash.
But we've also actually just confirm whether the CRER is correct or wrong, that we have 11 million excess.
It's correct the way they're proposing it, yes, because remember, the remainder 11 million is what they're estimating to collect to the end of the year. We're still in August.
Wait.
You
They're
understand?
proposing the
projecting.
11 million to collect
They're
at the end of the year? This
they're
is not
projecting.
actual collections.
No,
No, because their projection to the end of the year is 16.
yes, but if you look at the last column,
Yes.
on the top, it says, the second to the last column, it says FY23 revenue tracking. It's not actual, it's what they're tracking. By the end of the year, we hope to, we're talking about June CER report. They are tracking to collect 11 more by the end of the fiscal year. It is not cash in the bank today. So if the July statement, like Dave revealed to us, that they're going to collect 5 million more for the month of July CER report, so you add the 5 to the 11, that's the 16. So that 16 is what they're tracking to collect at the end of the fiscal year, not today.
16.
Yes, ma'am.
But today, we have 11.
If you're using the July.
But today, there is 11 in excess of what we appropriated.
No, again, Senator, it's not excess.
That's what they say.
No.
That's what they call it. Actual collections exceeding.
If you look at the second column on page 3, that's
all right.
the actual. That's the actual amount that we've collected. The second column on page 3.
Yes, I see it.
Okay.
I'm just going to say, Mr. Chair, we had we had BBMR, DOA telling us we have actually collected 11 million more, in every other appropriation prior to today, we have used this number. In fact, they've even deducted all the appropriations that we have made from excess funds to show there's a whole list of appropriations made from excess FY23 funds. But all of a sudden, now you guys are going to tell us we don't really have excess funds? That's honestly what is going on here. This is, I'm not going to argue with you, but I'm just saying, come on. We used it for every single other appropriation that we have done in the last probably 6 months. And now all of a sudden, we're going to change the whole methodology. And now the DOE and BBMR told us on the record, we have 11 million and we might end up with 60. Now all of a sudden, I don't know. It just seems like what's good for the goose is not good for the gander. That makes no sense. Well, I want to get back to the point of this is, if there is $11 million like DOE and BBMR have told us on sworn testimony in excess funds from FY23, then why would the legislature not want to appropriate that instead of leaving it for them to decide where they want to spend it? They told us they have 0 deficit. Did you hear that? They said, we have no deficit. They said, DOE said they have no lapse funds. They also said they're super short from this current appropriation, that OFB did not fund them enough to cover what they needed. So here we are, trying to come up with a source that actually affects nobody negatively. It doesn't affect anybody's operations, but it will absolutely help DOE, and it will give them money that we have given to GPA, we've given to GDA for LEAP, we've given to other people, or supposedly tried to give, and it will give it to DOE instead of letting it linger out there and do nothing for nobody. While DOE tells us that without an additional appropriation, they are going to be able to cover personnel, existing personnel only. No additional personnel. They are going to be able to cover their power and their water and their telephone. Actually, not even. They said they would have 10 million for operations, and their power, their water, their telephone is 22.5 million. And at 10 million more for critical work that they need, they're short 30 million. So I support this amendment. I think it's a great use of excess funds that we don't have to debate whether they really exist or not, because we have a CRER in front of us and we have sworn testimony telling us this exists. And if we don't use it,
Thank you.
they will come up with other purposes for it, or maybe people in here have other purposes for this, but I find that this should be the priority today.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Point of information,
Yes.
Mr. Chair. 3705 was adjusted the budget, okay?
Correct.
So let's be very, very clear about when we're talking about funding sources here. This amendment does not adjust the budget. It does not raise revenues. It does not take into consideration other categories such as rainy day fund and other taxes that would be affected by it. When the appropriation was made in this fiscal year for the 20 million, it was done right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Point of information, Mr. Chair.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, Public Law 3705 raised revenues. What was the source of that revenue raise? It was excess funds. I don't understand the hypocrisy that they want to throw out here right now.
Do your budget the right way. It's not hypocrisy. It's about if you're going to do
Order.
an amendment,
Okay.
do it the correct way.
Let's get back to order. Thank you for the two. Steve, we're going to comment, so we bring some
Asking for
clarity.
any comment, Mr. Chair. That was my time to
Yes.
make my comment.
Yeah, your time is up. Yeah, but Steve Guerrero would like to make a statement in reference to the budget. I'm not against that appropriation, okay? It's just that there's a timing, there's a reason for everything. And I'll speak to the author about it when we do a quick recess. Steve, if you can, go ahead and comment, then we'll end it.
I'd ask for a recess, Mr. Chair.
Ask for recess?
Yes.
Okay, let's take a quick recess. Thank you. Committee of the Whole is called back to order. Senator Barnett, I know you had you wanted to add an amendment, just to add a word into his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to add the word excess. So it should read, additional funding for GDOE's operations budget, the sum of up to $10 million is appropriated to the Guam Department of Education from excess general fund revenues of fiscal year 23 for the purpose of supplementing GDOE's operations for fiscal year 24, except that up to $500,000 shall be allocated to the Chamorro language program. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. Does anyone would like to speak to that amendment? The amendment to the amendment? There being none, then that amendment passes. Now back to the amendment as amended. Does anyone like to speak to that? Senator Tello?
Mr. Chair. My question is to Steve. With regards to the FY22 budget that we're waiting for, the audit from FY22. We ended a surplus in FY22 with about 47, is that correct? Based on the CRR report for September 2022?
That's what is reflecting, Senator, yes.
Okay, and because we don't have that audit, which we should have had in June, we can't really tell what that number is in reality. And in your opinion, whenever we end a fiscal year on an excess, it usually is lower than what is printed on paper. Is that true?
Historically, Senator, yes.
Historically, okay. When I asked OFB and I asked Mr. Byrne as well as Lester, what kind of cushion should you have at the end of the year to ensure that whatever you did appropriate in excess revenue, that the reality is you'll be able to pay for it? The amount that, that I was told was $30 million at the end. Is that about right, Steve?
Well, if that's what they're citing, then I'm sure that that's their opinion.
Okay, then what about you? What do you think we should have at the end of a fiscal year, just to be comfortable, knowing that historically the amount goes down?
Well, if you just go back to fiscal year 2021, I believe the CER report showed as of September 30th, excess amount, I believe, of $61 million. When the audit was finally passed, that amount actually dropped down to about 31 million. So you're looking at maybe a 50% drop of what was actually recorded in the CER report as of September of that year. Mm-hmm. So using that as a benchmark, a safeguard, if we're tracking $100 million, no, that's for 2022. Yeah, $103 million. Take half of that, we're talking about 50 million would be on the safe side.
Yeah, but you're looking at FY 2022 because in FY 22 we adjusted and appropriated the LEAP, Public Works, Guam Regional Transit Authority that took about 30 million. And then further down in the FY 22 or 26, I'm sorry, not 26, I'm sorry, FY23 budget, we took an additional 25,906,302. And it was kind of ironic, I think I might have asked you this question before, unappropriated balance. This was the Office of Public Accountability. And then you had unappropriated balance for Guam Waterworks, Ancestral Lands, GASC Council, and then for DOE COLA. Then further down for Department of Ag was Cannabis and Culture. You had audited surplus balance, as well as the Slaughterhouse, Specialty Doctors, and Capital Improvement Fund for Guam Memorial Hospital for audited surplus balance. My question is, which would be paid first? the audited balance or the unappropriated balance?
Senator, I believe, once appropriations are made by the legislature, all those appropriations are subject to the availability of cash to back them up. I don't think there's, not that I can recall, there's a priority of what public laws are higher in statute or more important as they're passed. I would like to think that as public laws are passed, those actual cash are set aside to cover those appropriations and not kind of like wait until the end of the year to decide, what public laws get to be funded.
So it sounds to me like audited surplus would probably take a back seat to unaudited balance?
I believe whatever expenditures are expended during the fiscal year would probably be the most likely appropriations to be funded, yes.
So in other words, they can wait until the audited surplus or the audited budget to hold off and then, not pay the unappropriated balance. So basically, it's up to the administration, right?
Well,
What gets paid first?
I would think, Senator, if you're tracking $100 million, say towards the end of the year, say maybe halfway during the year, you bring in $50 million, and you appropriate $25 million out of that 50. I think it would be safe to say that you can fund the $25 million with those revenues that you've collected thus far in that fiscal year. I wouldn't advise you to try to appropriate and fund all appropriations made up to the amount that you collected in excess. Give yourself, again, I always say, a little cushion room just in case things don't materialize or pan out the way we all want it to.
So we're back at that cushion that we talked about earlier, ensuring that there is some funding, that we would be able to actually become a reality for whatever we appropriate. And right now, you're saying that it's only $7 million in excess revenue that we would have for FY23. That's awfully low. Another question with regards to Chamorro Affairs, Chamorro language program, they're asking for another 500. What was the request from them and what did we give them for Chamorro language program?
Give me 1 second, Senator.
Sure.
Yes, Senator. The department's request was $581,970.
And how much did we give them in this budget?
We appropriated, or we set aside, $513,000, Senator.
I'm sorry?
We funded, I think, $513,000.
513,000? Is that what you said, Steve? I'm sorry.
That's on page 12 for my colleagues.
513,284 is the exact amount, or
Okay.
824.
Okay. So pretty much we gave them almost, what they asked for.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so
Yes.
they asked for 581, so it's a little shy compared to giving them another 500,000. Okay, that's all the questions I have. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Tello. Does anyone else like to speak to this, the amendment as amended? Are there any, I'm waiting for the author, but before I ask the author to, let's take a quick recess, real quick, so I can get the author back in so he can make the closing if he chooses. There he is. Senator Barnett, if you can make the closing on your, or Madam Speaker, you'd like to speak to the amendment?
Yes.
As amended?
Thank you. If OFB or you, Mr. Chair, could tell us what happened to the $35 million audited surplus from FY19? Where did it go?
FY 2019?
Yes.
I'm sure if there was no appropriations made against those excess revenues.
Excuse me. Let me get legal opinion because I believe, Speaker, you spoke already earlier on the amendment, so.
Well, you said on the amended amendment.
I know. That's why I'm trying to get clarification because to make sure that we're tracking. Because it's amended as amended. Just 1 minute, and once I get a legal green light, because I know Senator Chris is also waiting if he can speak because it's a different amendment now.
Mr. Chair, our understanding is you speak on amendment when it's proffered. If you don't speak on the amendment when it's proffered, you're back to the main motion. So the speaker's already spoken on the main motion.
That's correct. I just want to clarify, just to make sure.
Yeah, but the amendment was proffered by the author of the original amendment, meaning we went back to the original. We went back.
Understood.
Otherwise, that's not allowed.
I'll just give.
I just want the clarification, Mr. Chair, because if that's the case, every time an amendment's amended, then
Everybody gets to
it's a
speak
new
again.
5-minute round for everybody, then everybody
Yes.
speaks again.
Yes,
That's
I'm
good.
just making sure.
If that's
I got
your
that
rule,
right. Thank you.
Well, I was unfamiliar with that one.
Just a minute recess. Committee rules is called back to order. Based on legal advice, Madam Speaker, you won't be able to speak. You already spoke on the main amendment. Does anyone else like to speak? I apologize.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, but I just want to raise this point of order. I'm not going to argue with you, but you recognize the amendment maker to come in the middle of the debate and make another amendment. That's completely the same thing.
Well, I just asked legal, and legal gave me their legal advice, so I'm going to write with that. Anyone else like to speak to this amendment? Otherwise, I'll ask the author to close his amendment as amended.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to get to the vote already. Clearly, the Guam Department of Education has indicated to us that they need $10 million and more to just be able to make ends meet for the next fiscal year. So I humbly, with all due respect, ask for the support of my colleagues. I don't know how many more ways I can change the language here. So we'll just get it to the vote already. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Barnett. Are there any objection to the amendment as amended? You got one objection. All in favor, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Motion fails. My colleagues, we are now, we have completed all the amendments on part 1 of chapter 2. Now is there any other amendment? There are no other amendments. It's 11:10 right now, and I know we're basically, I'm closing chapter 2. We'll go now into chapter 3, which is GMH, Guam Memorial Hospital Authority, and I'd ask if there's, I always try to be cautious, so I'm going to go ask us to recess. So if there's any amendment to go to GMH, we add it. Are there any amendments at this time? GMH. There are no amendments on GMH. If anyone needs time now, this is the only time I'm going to give you. Otherwise, we're going to go right into chapter 3, part 1.
Mr. Chair,
Okay.
we still have the opportunity to comment though, right? Because there are some
No,
concerns.
you can comment, but
Okay.
there'll be no allowance, a rule of our order. That's what I'm asking. If anyone was going to tell me now, you might be proffering amendment, I'm going to recess so that you can do it. Because once I start chapter 3, no amendments will be allowed. I'll rule it out of order. Okay, so does any of my colleagues feel that they may author an amendment? If not, no amendments. Okay, we will now proceed to comments. Yes, Senator Blas, do you have a comment you want to make?
With regard to Chapter 3 and GMH, Mr. Chair, I request that we bring in the healthcare officials to be able to speak.
You want to bring, we want to turn the discussion of the budget into a public hearing? Is that like another oversight?
No, we may have questions with regards to what they want in their budget, and we want to hear from them.
Okay, what Senator Blas is asking is that we bring in GMH folks here. There may be questions they want to pose. I mean, we did have a public hearing on GMH, budget hearing. Are there any objection to that? That we're going to call GMH folks, specifically the administrator? I'm not bringing in the whole GMH, okay? There's going to be about 2 or 3 people. Please identify who you like, Senator Blas.
Yeah, the administrator and your CFO.
And, okay, administrator and CFO. So we will recess until 2 o'clock, and we'll contact. If I didn't make it clear, Chapter 2 is closed, so I'll make that statement now. Chapter 2 is now closed. Now we're going to we're in Chapter 3. And we're going to recess. There's no amendments, so don't even think of it. But we are going to call in the administrator and the CFO. So we'll recess till 2 o'clock so we can contact them, make sure they're here at 2 o'clock. All right, so recess till 2 o'clock.